Turning from horror at Terror Creek specifically for the moment, I like to ask all my guests similar questions about basically what are your favorite horror movies and or horror comedy movies?
I get excited about these questions. Yeah. I
Try
love this
to keep them
stuff.
separate from my B movie question later, though,
Yeah.
if you can.
Yeah.
All right.
I did. I wrote them down because I sort of felt like I had to do that, or we would be here for 45 minutes or an hour. We could talk about this, you and I, we know, for 4 hours.
Actually,
if we wanted.
yeah.
So I got to be careful. I think, I think if I was, and these are hard questions too, right? You really like, unless you have them filed away, there's so many too that still will resonate. But like I'm getting older, and we're constantly feeding the well, or filling the well, I should say, with all newer things. And there's all this great, like Kelsey and I, my wife and I, that's our date night. We love watching horror.
Yes.
Anything from any era, from anything, but recently we've been delving over the last year or so into all the Korean horror and some of the newer stuff that's been coming out of Korea.
Yeah.
So you're the well gets full, and that's where your brain is. And of course, I'm going back through some of my catalogs, because we own some things. I'm going, oh yeah, that one. Oh yeah, that. So I had to write them down.
Nah, no problem.
Anyways, I'll start with the North, the American and Canadian stuff. I was always big, growing up, was a big fan of the 70s has been my era for a lot of cinema worldwide, but specifically with American pop culture. I even got a Canadian one in there, the Changeling. Let's start with that. That was I think in 19, that film, George C. Scott. I'm very, very, as is my wife, we love the paranormal stuff. That's our haunted house stories are our favorites. When I was a kid, I think I was really big on, the Halloweenish sort of stalker films. Yeah. But, things like The Exorcist, of course. This is more sci-fi horror, but The Thing, the old one and the remake with John Carpenter, which I really loved when I was younger, had a big impact on me. Rosemary's Baby, of course, which I think I watched just a couple of months ago, still stands very high. That's a pillar here. I was a big fan of, the Stephen King thing is a touchy thing to talk about because there's been some good stuff, as we know, and then there's been a lot of bad as well.
Yes.
But like bad movies.
Fun, but yeah.
Bad can be super fun.
Yeah, and you could sort of categorize some of his bad movies into B-movie land too, definitely.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I think, but one that really, and it still resonates, and we own it, and I love, is the television version of Salem's Lot was a big one for me. When I
have that one too. Yes.
You have that?
Yep.
And it still to me has, because it's Tobe Hooper, right? Is that is that how you say his name? Toby or Tobe?
Right. Toby.
He really created a wonderful atmosphere in that movie that to me is just as haunting as any of the, the scary sort of story elements happening. There's just a really creepy atmosphere of that, fish out of water that arrives in the small creepy town, kind of like Terror Creek, right?
Yep.
That you're kind of, it's one I just love to revisit because I think it's very unique. I think it's a great unique little movie with a lot of my favorite character actors from that era too.
And I actually like the book very much too. It's
been
a long time since I've read it, but I do like Salem's Lot, the book.
And then moving into, of course, The Shining being, again, one of the pillars.
Yeah.
I'm big on that one. Kelsey's big on that one. It's funny, they did, we've been here in New York, as I mentioned, for a few years, and so we try to take advantage of any sort of very New Yorky big screenings and things that happen here. And of course, there's all sorts of great revival houses here. There's a place that this guy Colin refurbished called the Film Forum here that he kicked off a new season last year when he reopened its doors, and he was showing all these great old Buster Keaton films that he's restored to 4K and all this stuff.
Wow. And
one night he had a screening of The Shining. So Kelsey and I jumped on the subway and we had a date night. We went, and what was interesting is and this is a whole other thing that we could do another 4 hours on, is revisiting these films. Is what made this experience different, and we even saw it in a smaller theater. It wasn't a very big theater,
right?
But the sound in that movie and the the volume of the sound for that particular screening was really loud. So that music in that film was incredibly loud. Now, if you think of any point during that film, if you can kind of recall, anyway, I found that so impactful because that actually added to even a newfound terror to me. I'd never watched it with the sound that loud. And even those opening strains, those chords, as they're, the car's weaving its way up, already just beautifully created this terror that just lasted throughout the movie. And then some of those stings and things that were happening in the film really made me literally jump out of my seat sometimes. So that was exciting.
Yeah.
I really love the film, the Swedish, I think Let the Right One In, the vampire film. You know that one? Yeah, you must. I mean, you probably know all these. This is more of a contemporary thing. Psycho, I'm still really big on. And I would say even in the American more sort of, multiplex form of James Wan universe, I really love The Conjuring. When I went and saw The Conjuring in the theater, did you?
Oh, yeah.
I jumped out of my seat, and I thought, because they, again, I think he was going for some very 70s, there was a 70s vibe about the entire film.
Yeah.
And I thought he pulled some great moves in that story.
He did.
So that was one. Koreans, there's a few. I'll just try and keep this short because, of course, I could go on forever. A Tale of Two Sisters is one that I just saw recently, and that's an older film, but I thought that was really brilliant. That's obviously the translation of the title. Another one is that I think is a little more recent and is really good, and this is a found footage style.
Oh, yes.
Which, to me, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I want to pronounce this correctly, but it's Gonjiam. I think it's Gonjim.
Okay.
Haunted Asylum.
Okay.
And so it's it's about a TV crew that wanders with their show, a haunted house show, into an old asylum.
Nice.
Very simple setup, but it's actually a really beautiful slow burn of a movie that kind of does some creaky doors and things, and then the last 30 minutes of this movie really left me, and as I love these things to do, left me having a hard time sleeping that night. and stayed with me for days. Kelsey and my wife and I were talking about it for days afterwards. So there were just even a couple of moments that they pulled in that I just really shook me to my core. Great. Japanese, Pulse. There's a movie called Translates to Pulse that I'm very big on. I don't know if you know that one.
I know.
Ringu, of course.
Yes.
Another American one, The Entity. That was a big one when I was younger too. The American film, The Entity. And Martin Scorsese talks about that one a lot too. He likes that.
Which I still.
That was a good one. The Entity. Yeah, you should check that one out. It's good. And then I am a sucker for, and I bought recently and showed my daughter, the Karloff stuff, and. You've got the Frankensteins and the Bride of Frankenstein, which I love. I think they're a great companion piece, those two films. I know, Guillermo del Toro, some of our, great filmmakers.
Yes.
Really love those. They're really great works of art. And of course, you and I both I love all the history of the studios and why they made them and when they made them and how, and, and all the lore. So I'm really big on those. Comedy horror is a genre that doesn't really stoke me that much, but I would say that if I wrote down a couple that these lean more on the comedy side, but of course
they usually do.
Bubba Hotep, if you consider that.
Yes. Yep.
I love. I mean, we don't even have to talk about that movie. And another one is Young Frankenstein, which I guess technically, right?
Yep, it is.
But that one I still love.
Oh yeah. That's that's an absolute classic. And if you love the old Frankenstein movies, yes. I think you're gonna love Young Frankenstein. And of course, if you also love comedy and Mel Brooks, then it's
then you would love that
Wilder.
as well.
No, it's terrific, of course. And
it's funny that I took on to all those things. To horror films at a very early age because, and I think you and I talked about this too, Ring. I grew up near Detroit in Canada, a little town called Sarnia in Ontario, and we got a cable channel out of there, Cable 7, Channel 7, and they would have a creature feature on every Saturday. that it was so great too, because they used oh my God, what was the song? They played a Led Zeppelin song to introduce, which I mean, clearly they didn't have the rights to do this, to introduce the creature feature. But there I saw, you'd see like Oliver Reed playing the Wolfman, or like, they showed a lot of great B-movie stuff, Godzilla films, Abbott and Costello meet the Mummy or whatever it is. You'd see a lot of those things in this, and stuff that you and I love and grew up on. So I could probably name about 20 titles from that part of my life as well.
Right. In the B-movie genre-esque kind of thing.
I think they would fall more in the
favorites
B-movie genre.
Of yours. Are there more B-movie faves you wanted to mention, or?
Yeah. Oh, you know what? There's one that I could talk about again for another 4 hours, and I'm not going to. But there was one that I'm not sure if it was a television film. I got two here. I'll do the quick one first. Called Bad Ronald, I think was the title. Have you ever heard of this one?
No.
It's about, I think, as I remember it, and I haven't seen it in years, so now I may even get part of the story wrong, but it haunted me as a kid. It's about a family, I think, that moves into a house that hasn't been inhabited, typical setup in many years, and strange happenings start to happen, and they find a young man living in the walls that he hid for whatever, and I don't remember the reason, but he either hid in the walls and never came out. Like, that's just that alone right there, right? Yeah. It's just terrifying. Bad Ronald, and I think he's terrorizing this terrorizing this family.
Yeah.
The other one that I feel like, and this falls into sci-fi more than it does, I would say, horror, but I think it's worth talking about because it was a B movie that became very popular at the time, and I really resonates with me, and I own this one as well, is The Incredible Shrinking Man.
Oh yeah, is that Richard Matheson?
Yeah, it is.
Writer.
That's right.
Oh, yes.
And
yeah.
He wrote the. Good. You know your stuff. I actually had to research it last night, but he wrote the book, I believe, and then he did. I think was it Universal Studio? I can't remember the studio. They adapted to the film. Yeah.
And I think you're right about the studio, but I'm not positive. But yeah.
Yeah, and then they wanted to cast a star. I was trying to, I was just researching some of the stuff last night, and they didn't get the star they wanted. So I can't remember who ended up playing Scott Carey is the lead, is the Shrinking Man.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful tale because, again, it's another one that I think is, and of course, the setup is that they're out on a boat, he and his wife, this radioactive mist, or we don't know what it is, appears suddenly while his wife is down below getting them drinks in the boat, and he breathes this thing in, or it gets on his skin and it leaves him glistening, I think. And he, so he feels all right. But then, of course, he notices about a year later that he's starting to shrink. His clothes are getting bigger. He goes to the doctor, and the doctors say, sure enough, you are shrinking. And after they do a number of tests, they even think, I think at some point, and I think this is in the movie, I don't know if it was in the book, but they think it's a combination of this, whatever this radioactivity possibly was, and a pesticide that he had come in contact with maybe after that.
Of course, social.
It changed his
societal issues.
Well, and talking about this right now, with in this, with everything that's going on right now, it's just an interesting thing. Like that, it changes the molecular structure of it, of his body, and of course he's shrinking, and it ends up kind of becoming this sci-fi. Well, I think it's here. This is great to pull it back to Terror Creek, because I feel like it's another film that combines a number of beautiful things, and I think this is partly because it was based on probably a great sci-fi book.
Yeah.
So it's sci-fi. I think it's got some horror elements to it, but it also is a and the time that it was made, it probably had to do with the radioactivity probably had to do with I don't know, who knows, just fear that was. That was pervasive all across America at the time about
current anxiety. Yeah.
Current anxieties. I think that, there's an interesting thing about the piece too about him. He eventually has to live in a dollhouse and wear doll clothes. So it's kind of emasculating. I think it was about male anxieties at the time, maybe, who knows. And also philosophically, there comes a point where, to me, where the real horror comes in, where he drops out of sight, spoiler alert, from his wife, where she thinks he's dead now because she can't see him anymore.
Right.
And he falls into the basement where he has to battle the big spider. That's what you see in the poster. And there's this beautiful ending where he kind of begins to realize his place in the universe. And it really stayed with me after the first time I saw that he actually is standing there looking at these giant blades of grass, that he realizes he's going to continue to shrink. And to where that's going to take him, he doesn't know. But that there's a beautiful monologue that is said at the end that, is probably just straight from Matheson's writing.
Right.
About his place in the universe. And I thought, wow, it's a brilliant film, I think, in that way. And another one where I think, much like we were talking about Hooper, there's an atmosphere to that film as well that's very, very, why I consider a horror film too, that is very haunting throughout the whole thing, as he's getting up each day and he's weighing himself, and he becomes very tyrannical with his wife the smaller he gets. And anyway, it's a beautiful film, and if you haven't seen, and I guess we would have been considered a B movie at the time.
Yeah, well, and still, B movie, cult movie, it may still, but with the extra moniker of classic to it now, that gives it extra cachet. I would say, yeah.
I love it.
What about horror movies that you've been in?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't had. I've done it, but I haven't had the pleasure of doing it a lot. It's something that I would love to. I would love to do. And I was in a sort of a psychological horror thriller, a Canadian-made film with Sinead Grimes, great cast, Gil Bellows, Don McKellar. And that was made a couple of years ago, I think in 2008. No, maybe even longer than that. Anyway, in the maybe 2015, around there, directed by Jeff Kopis. It was written by him as well.
Yeah, it looks like 2017. I just had it on my screen there from before. So yeah, 2017.
Yeah, I should do a plug for the film because I shouldn't give a lot away. I don't want to give any spoilers or anything, but this setup is about a young woman who suffered a tragedy early on in her life, and it's taken her years to come home back to where this place has happened, but she has to come home to this place that's a little isolated up in northern Ontario, and where we shot it on location. This beautiful spot, very isolated though. And and she's sort of reintroduced to this cast of characters that were her family, or are her family, or are they, from her early life, and she's having to confront a number of things, namely, this thing that's happened in the past and how it's affected her. So, and throughout her life, and her father, played by Gil Bellows, does a really wonderful job. So, it's worth checking. Blood Honey is the title, if I haven't said it already.
Yeah.
Jeff Kopis.
All right. Well, so hopefully you'll get a chance to do more horror movies or fun horror movies in your future.
Love to. Yeah.
Horror comedies, whatever. Before I forget, though, about talking the faves, you mentioned to me about a book, an anthology of short stories that affected you, particularly when you were young. And I think you remember. Do you remember the name of the short story? I think anyway.
The short story it was an anthology that I think I pulled from my library at the public school that I went to in Sarnia, Ontario, and I was probably maybe only about 9 or 10 years old, and it was probably, I would imagine, a middle school book, or it was aimed at for older kids, because it was quite terrifying, and it had some comedy horror stories in there as well. But they started the whole book, and I remember this with a short story called The Furry Caller. And I'll just tell it to you because I can't remember the name of the book, but The Furry Caller was a short story. It all takes place in one night of a girl who has her friend come to sleep over, and they're left in their house. And this to me was a great setup, alone to watch scary movies, while her parents go next door to hang out with their friends next door.
Right.
And so they're checking in every now and then, and the two girls are left alone to watch some scary things where, when it comes time to go up to the bedroom, they go up to the bedroom and they start trying to scare each other. And part of scaring each other is one of them always has to go downstairs to do something, in the dark, and then come back up, or, go to get a drink out of the fridge or do something, or,
Right.
And what ends up happening is while they're upstairs, I think the parents call and check in at one point. And then after they check in, all of a sudden there's a sound from the basement. And it's a sound of, as I remember it, the sound of grinding, like a real, like metallic kind of grinding sound, a very scary, weird sound. And they don't know what it is. So they're trying to force, to get one of them is, to go downstairs and check this out. Nobody wants to do it, of course. They're just sitting there. And of course, they're in their pajamas, and her friend is wearing her nightie with a furry collar.
Okay.
And at one point, her friend goes down to see what it is, and it doesn't come up for the longest time.
Right.
And she hears the sound again. And now she's getting scared. She doesn't have access to the phone. She doesn't want to go downstairs. Her parents aren't, none of this is happening. The lights are, she's terrified. But then she's thinking her friend's probably playing a joke on her. And sure enough, she starts to hear these clumping footsteps come up the stairs slowly.
Right.
So she starts yelling her friend's name out. Stop it, stop it, stop doing this, doing clump. The suspense of the clumping all the way up that stops right in front of her door and just stops there.
Right.
So she's yelling at her through the door, and she says, I'm going to open this door. I know it's you. Stop it. This isn't funny anymore. And then she thinks, you know what? What if it's not her? It's her. It's got to be her. I'm going to rip open the door just enough to get my arm in, and I'm going to reach out and grab her furry collar, and then I'll know it's her. And when she does it, she opens the door, she throws her arm out, and when she grabs onto something. But I think the last line was, but it was the bloody stump that her head was once on, or something like that.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Ooh.
That was the story. I'm certainly not doing it any justice, but that was a story. It sticks with me, stuck with me forever. Oh, right. I actually didn't tell it very well. She reaches out, feels the furry collar first.
Right.
And then her hand makes way up to the bloody stump.
yeah, that's gross.
The furry collar.
Yeah, cool.
I know that also too, did you wanted to, I know you're really big on Halloween, of course, too, right?
Yes, I did want to talk about your favorite thing about Halloween. That's usually how I wrap things up, and Halloween rituals, past and present, current, and all that good stuff.
My gosh, it's funny. I don't know. This is a great one to answer, and I laughed when I saw this because I have not been celebrating Halloween for years and years and years and years. I mean, it wasn't anything that really stoked me after, I guess, a certain age, but once I had a kid, that certainly started to change. But what's interesting is that my wife is huge on it, right? Mm-hmm. So what I was just going to mention is that I should say it started even before we had our daughter. But my wife has always made a ritual of Halloween. The decorations, everything come out early. She has a whole ritual on the day of where she makes soups, and that's plural, not just one. She makes many. Opens the door to the community to come over and have soups. And while we, hand out candy and we do our thing, and she's done, and I even think you might even know this, right? She's done like a full decorations, costumes. We even had a fog machine at one point that used to blow out the door down our driveway. The horror sounds all day while she's cooking soups too. It's like, there's just a playlist of everything. Wes Craven, Hooper, Rosemary's Baby. She does that whole, she loves it. So and whether I liked it or not in the beginning, we were living Halloween. As soon as I married, got my wife and I, I was thrust into these yearly rituals of Halloween, which I do really look forward to and I love. And of course, since having Maya really loves it too. And she's becoming her own little horror aficionado too, slowly and surely. I got to be careful.
Yeah.
I should tell you that I can't believe I'm going to admit this. Maya watched Jaws, the original Jaws, mm-hmm. Spielberg's Jaws, at 6 years old.
Okay. Yeah.
Which
Yeah, my dad.
I
I was 6 or 7 when I saw some really inappropriate things, you know, horror things, and also
right.
sometimes, you know, some comedies with too much foul language in them too. So yeah, Beverly Hills Cop, for example.
I'm of the. I mean, look, it's my daughter. I know my daughter, and I knew that, you know, we took certain precautions with it. I'm saying this, of course, because there is that large part of me that still feels terribly guilty about doing it, and I still get razzed by a lot of my friends for having done that. They're like, "We can't believe you showed her Jaws." And I thought, okay, The Exorcist is still a ways off. We're not doing that.
Yeah, wait until she's 12. See, you're not going to get any judgment from me. I think this is completely appropriate.
I know. I knew I could talk to you about this.
The kids need to be initiated into this sort of thing. You know?
If anything, I knew you would have a huge appreciation for it. If anything.
Exactly. Yeah.
Her reactions to the original Frankenstein were really great too. You know, like that she had such empathy.
Oh, you know? Yeah. Well, that makes sense, though. I mean,
and it's in its design, you know, which is beautiful, right? That she was torn apart at the end of the film for the monster, you know, that had happened. Still talking about it.
Yeah. Aw.
Yeah.
Good. You're setting her up right for a very cool adult. Absolutely. which is what's important here. So, you know, make sure all our kids end up B movie, cult movie, horror movie, genre movie, and book, etc. appreciators.
Of course, because it's got to start somewhere, you know. And, you know, there are those people, as we know, Regan, that and maybe that would be an interesting thing to have on your show at some point, you know, to have somebody who doesn't like this kind of stuff or doesn't, and have them talk about those experiences. I do know, you know, people like that too, the people that just do not take to any of those genres whatsoever, especially with film.
Actually, last year I did interview somebody a little bit like that, Susan Berger, who played the real butcher in American Horror Story Roanoke. She doesn't like horror. Doesn't mean she's an actress, so she's not going to turn her nose up at things. And so we had a great conversation, but horror is not her cup of tea, though. So it's kind of funny.
Right.
Here she is still in the industry, at least sometimes anyway. So yeah.
Oh my God, it's so. Let me ask you something quickly before we wrap up here. So, what is, and I'm sure you're plugging anything that you're doing on these during these interviews. But because we haven't connected in a while, what brilliant, new, amazing, crazy things are you cooking up on your end?
Well, I guess a couple things I can update you and everyone else on is I'm actually, because I did a novelette adaptation of Horror at Terror Creek, I actually came up with some new ideas in it that I want to move back to the play version. So when it gets produced as a play or even as a film, all this new stuff that I came up with is in there too, because there's a whole extra, not a whole scene, but a whole end of this scene where, well, I won't say, you know, spoilers. That's a whole new funny bit is in there. Otherwise, the changes are a little bit on the small side, but that's one thing. But I guess most recently is the Roger Corman, which most people who watch or talk to me at all know who he is, king of B movies all time. Yeah. He put out a challenge recently. He decided to have his first and hopefully last Corman Quarantine Film Festival on Twitter and any social media platform, Facebook, Instagram, whatever. So he put the challenge out there to make a movie with your cell phone and only, you know, the people you're living with, people or creatures, only in your home or backyard and with materials that you have under 2 minutes. So I decided to go ahead and do that with Kevin. We both shot this thing in a couple hours on a Saturday recently, and it's called Mr. Twizzle's Breakfast, and it's named after one of my picture books that I wrote for children. But this little film is not for children, especially small ones. There's no foul language or anything, but there's some implied violence, so yeah, not for children. So it's basically me doing a reading online of Mr. Twizzle's Breakfast. I don't get very far though, because Justine, one of the publishers of the book, created a puppet version of Mixter. And Mixter is a bit of a scary looking guy, actually, for a children's book character, but oh well. Right. He's scary and he's cute, but the puppet's quite freaky. And it kind of starts moving on its own and follows me into the bedroom. And yeah, and then I'll just leave it at that. So that's you guys can check it out on Triple Take Productions YouTube channel. And yeah, maybe I could even post it in this blog post that I'm interviewing you for. And I will also post Christopher's turn, so people can listen to that song very
the demo, right
in this blog. Yeah. So definitely need to check that out. So those are the horror comedy things that I'm working on at the moment, besides interviewing people like yourself, Scott, who love and appreciate horror and B movies and culty stuff. So yeah, that's it in a nutshell.
Keep writing, keep doing it.
Oh, I will. That's not going to stop anytime soon.
God, I'm just looking at the time now, and you were like, "Hey, 20 or 30 minutes," and I've driven us for an hour.
I know. Sorry. It's cool. It's all good. It's been great.
Well, I love seeing you. I could do this for 4 hours.
Yeah. No, we clearly could just go on and on and on. But maybe I will wrap things up for those who are viewing this. Thank you so much, Scott. It's been great talking to you about this stuff.
Great talking to you. Oh, yeah, anytime. I look forward to seeing more of these. You know?
There'll be another 13 at least during the Halloween season, starting October 19th is the first of the 13 days of Halloween. So, thanks.
Awesome. It's an honor to be a part. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll see you soon.